A pair of Big Ten teams landed big-time recruits in the class of 2024. Plus, Jose Perez has a new home out west, and we preview the Mid-American Conference all on today's Locked On College Basketball podcast.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part, of course, of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Andy Patton, and today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat over 50 infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. Well, folks, we are going to continue our conference preview series today. We're discussing the Mid-American Conference. Who among that big three of Kent State, Akron, and Toledo is going to go dancing in 2024? We'll give our thoughts and predictions today. But before we get to that, we got a couple recruiting updates to talk about in the Big Ten, starting with Liam McNeeley. 5-star small forward is going to Indiana. Mike Woodson and the Hoosiers continue to be a legitimate threat on the recruiting trail. McNeely was picking between Kansas and Indiana. Texas had been in that conversation for quite a while as well, although ultimately it came down to the Jayhawks and the Hoosiers. McNeely is a 6'7" small forward from Montverde Academy in Florida. He's the number 15 ranked player in the class of 2024. That's at 24/7 Sports, a consensus 5-star prospect, consensus top 20 guy, and what's shaping up to be a pretty solid 2024 class. And like we said, Mike Woodson's been doing work, folks. This is the third straight year where the Indiana Hoosiers are landing a 5-star recruit. It was Malik Reneau in 2022. It was Mackenzie Mbako heading into the 2023 season. And now Liam McNeeley in 2024. Here's the key, too. None of these guys are from Indiana. When Mike Woodson took over as the coach of the Hoosiers in 2021, he said, I'm going to recruit 5-star talent. I don't care where they're from. We want the best of the best here at Indiana. We're going to go get the best of the best. And he has more than led up to that. He has more than proven that he is capable of landing that kind of talent. And McNeely is just the latest in what has been a really successful trend of recruiting in Indiana. So we'll see if it can lead to some more results on the floor. Of course, there's a lot of competition in the Big Ten this season, but with Kalel Ware coming in the portal, Reneau expected to be a breakout candidate, and Mbako in the mix, this Indiana team could be really, really good. Could be up in that top 3 conversation alongside Purdue and Michigan State, and they're going to be even better once they get McNeely, a guy who averaged about 17 points and 5 boards on the EYBL circuit this last season, a guy that I think is going to have a really big impact for the Hoosiers right away and going to continue to kind of keep this program back in that legitimate national relevance year in and year out under Coach Woodson. Again, one of the big competitors for Indiana and the Big Ten is, of course, Michigan State and Tom Izzo. And you know, they're going to continue to keep doing what they do. Tom Izzo landed himself the son of a Spartans legend, Jason Richardson, who led that Michigan State team to a title in 2000, 5th overall pick by the Golden State Warriors in the 2001 NBA draft, had a long and productive NBA career, was a slam dunk champion, all sorts of great stuff. His son, Jase Richardson, top 30 prospect in the class of 2024. He's number 34, according to 24/7 Sports. Many other places have him in that top 30. He has committed to play for Tom Izzo, joining his dad. It's not the first time Tom Izzo has coached a father and son. It's something that happens when you end up coaching at the same place for a really, really long time. But this is a tremendous pickup for the Spartans here. Of course, their recruiting has been on point the last couple of years, and now they add Jason to a class that already has Kurt Tang, who's number 44 in the class of 2024, as well as Jesse McCullough, who's 129th. Again, that's at 24/7 Sports. ESPN has Jesse inside the top 100, giving them 3 top 100 prospects in that class of 2024. Jace is a 6'3" point guard. He averaged about 16.5 points, 3.8 assists on the EYBL circuit last summer. The future is really bright in East Lansing at the point guard position. You got, of course, it's looking really, really solid this year with the veterans that they're bringing back. They also got Jeremy Fears, 2023 freshman, coming into the group right now. Expectation is that he'll take on a bigger role next year. And then you have Jase Richardson coming in behind him in that class of 2024. Anybody's thinking that Michigan State's going to take a dip, Boy, howdy, it does not look like it. Last year, they weren't as good as they've been in the past. They still ended up going to the Sweet 16 as a 7 seed this year. The expectations are sky high for Tom Izzo and East Lansing, and it looks like this team is going to continue to be good for the next couple of years, probably until Izzo's gone, which may not be for a while. He said he hasn't been considering retiring yet, and why would he when he's continuing to land top 30, top 40 caliber prospects on the recruiting trail? All right, moving away from Big Ten recruiting news, we got to talk Jose Perez. Jose Perez has been a oft-discussed topic this offseason on Locked On College Basketball throughout the college basketball sphere. He's finally found a home, and hopefully it sticks for him. Sincerely, hopefully it sticks for him. He is committed to Arizona State. He hit the transfer portal out of West Virginia. Ole Miss and Arizona State were the two schools that reached out right away. Ultimately, he's going to go to Tempe to play for Bobby Hurley's team. Real quick, for those of you who are getting caught up on the Jose Perez saga, he last played at Manhattan in the 2021-22 season, averaged 19 points, 4.5 assists at Manhattan. He transferred to West Virginia after his coach was fired right before the season started. And then he did not get a waiver to play for Bob Huggins and the Mountaineers in the 22-23 season. It was a bit of a surprise. Typically, when players transfer because their coach gets canned, they tend to get that waiver granted. Perez was not given a waiver, sat out all of last year with the intention of playing this year for the Mountaineers, hit the portal after Bob Huggins was let go from West Virginia, got interest from a handful of schools. Michigan was interested, Oregon was interested, Gonzaga was interested, ultimately decided to stay, put his confidence in Coach Josh Ehlert, the interim for West Virginia. And then somewhat surprisingly, right as the school year was starting, he got kicked off the team. Kicked out of the program. There's some kind of conflicting reports on what happened. We won't get all the way into it until we know more, if we ever know more. But ultimately, he then entered the transfer portal again, and within a week found himself at Arizona State. This is a nice pickup for Bobby Hurley's team. Obviously, we haven't seen Perez in a very long time. He did spend 1 year at Marquette and wasn't particularly productive there, but there is some expectation that he can come in and contribute right away for Bobby Hurley's team, and they're probably going to need it. They lost 4 of their 5 leading scorers. The only guy coming back for them is Frankie Collins, who averaged about 10 points per game last year. They're going to be relying, on junior college transfer Malachi Davis, 4-star freshman incoming Braylon Green, Houston Christian transfer Bryson Long. There's a lot of uncertainty on how that group of guys is going to adjust right away, whether all of them, you probably need all of them to play pretty well in order for this team to get back into the big dance like they were last year, especially because right now, LSU transfer Adam Miller, who's a potentially big part of this Sun Devils team, we don't know if he's going to get a waiver approved or not. He's a 2-time transfer. The NCAA seems to be cracking down on 2-time transfers, so I think there's an expectation that Adam Miller will not get a waiver. If that's the case, Arizona State has a gap. They have playing time to give. Perez is a guy who has been at the college level for a long time. He's been itching to get back on the floor. You can probably get him situated and get him involved in your offense relatively quickly, and it'll be really fascinating to see how he does. I'm rooting for him. I don't know all of the stories about what's going on with him at West Virginia. It sounds like there might have been some academic issues there, but he shouldn't have ever been in this situation. He shouldn't have had to sit out last year. I disagree with the NCAA's decision, again, without all the information, but it certainly seems like that was a situation that was tailor-made for a waiver. He did not get it. And then, of course, it wasn't his fault that Bob Huggins went all Bob Huggins on us this offseason. So hopefully this works out for him. He gets to enjoy his final year of college basketball and plays well for the Sun Devils. Well, we are going to get into our MAC, Mid-American Conference preview, talking Toledo and Kent State. They have been the teams to beat in the MAC the last couple of years, but with virtually all of the key talent gone, this could be anybody's bid coming out of this conference this year. We got more on that after a word from today's sponsor, Jase Medical. With storms, shortages, pandemics, and supply chain issues plaguing this country, we need to be more prepared now than ever before. And everybody should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. And that's why Jase Medical offers the Jase Case. The Jase Case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you the peace of mind so that you're not just hoping that you have access to medication in an emergency. Jase Medical makes sure that you have that medication in hand. Jase Medical is simple. They handle everything from the online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. So don't get caught unprepared. Get $20 off on these life-saving antibiotics today at Jase Medical by using my promo code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE, just like Jace Richardson, medical.com. Doctor created, doctor recommended. Jase Medical. All right, folks, I want to thank all of you for making Locked On College Basketball your first listen or your first watch of the day. Shout out to those everyday listeners, and shout out to those of you checking out the show on YouTube as we get closer and closer to the start of the college basketball season. And today we continue our conference preview series. We have previewed every conference in college basketball, all 32 of them leading up to the college basketball season. We got 3 or 4 left as I'm recording this right now. And today we're talking MAC. And the big storyline in the MAC conference, as it is with a lot of mid-major conferences, unfortunately, is that most of the key talent from the conference is gone. In fact, for the Mid-American Conference, of their 15 all-conference players from the 22-23 season, only 2 of them are back. That's it. 13 guys gone, 2 of them coming back. The 2 guys coming back are first-teamer Enrique Freeman at Akron, as well as third-teamer David Coit at Northern Illinois University. Now, technically, Ali, who spent last year at Butler, he is back because he was at he was at Akron. He transferred to Butler. He transferred back to Akron. He was a 21-22 All-MAC player. So there's kind of 3 All-MAC players back, but really only 2 from last year's team. Everybody else either graduates or transfers. And there were some big names in the MAC conference last year who are out the door. Starting with Amani Bates. Amani Bates, of course, was at Eastern Michigan last year, kind of playing down at that level to get an opportunity to showcase more of his skills, to have more of a focal role. Ended up getting selected by the Cleveland Cavaliers in the NBA draft. He's gone. Sincere Carey was one of the best players in the conference last year at Kent State. He has graduated and moved on. Ray J. Dennis was the player of the year at Toledo. He is now transferred to Baylor, going to get a chance to play for Scott Drew and the Bears. You also have a trio of guys leaving Ball State. Boogie Coleman transfers to Nebraska. Peyton Sparks transfers to Indiana. Jalen Sellers transfers to Central Florida. And then Curtis Jones leaves Buffalo to go to Iowa State. So a conference with a lot of talent that is unfortunately out the door. And I think when you see conferences like that, I mean, they're putting guys in at Baylor, putting guys in the Big Ten at Indiana, putting guys in the Big 12 at Iowa State. Like, this is a conference that is proving that they have talent year in and year out. The coaches are great. The players are great. The systems are great. And we're seeing guys come into this conference and succeed. But it's frustrating and it's tough when so many of them leave. I don't blame the players. How could you possibly blame a player for getting the opportunity to go play for Scott Drew and the Baylor Bears? That makes total sense to me, but it is something where these conferences kind of have to keep rebuilding and rebuilding and rebuilding year in and year out. Now, one thing it does do is it creates a little bit more likelihood of parity. Some of these teams, Kent State was very good last year, but they lose Sincere Carey, they lose a couple other big pieces, and suddenly it's like, hey, they're not necessarily just going to continue to be the top of the league. Now, a lot of those programs have good enough coaches that they continue to replenish that talent. And we'll talk about that more later in the show, of which of these teams we think are still going to be near the top despite losing key pieces. But it is hard to see a serious movement of players out the door from this conference, because there was a lot of talent in the MAC last year. A couple coaches that have changed hands as well. Buffalo replaces Jim Whitesell with Coach George Halcave III. Whitesell went 70-49 in his 4 years at Buffalo, but he only went 15-17 last year. And in fact, his record kind of got worse every single year. So I think that's kind of why they decided to finally make a move there. He was previously a head coach at Loyola from 2004 to 2011. So lots of head coaching experience. And now he is an assistant coach at Albany. Meanwhile, they bring Halcavage in, spent 15 years as an assistant for Jay Wright at Villanova. 15 years under one of the best coaches in college basketball history. He was an associate head coach for Villanova in that 2021 season when they went 30-8 and went to the Final Four. And in fact, twice, this coach was named a top 50 most impactful assistant, both in 2020 and in 2022. So this is a really nice hire for Buffalo to get Halcavage. Buffalo, of course, a program that also had Nate Oates as their head coach. They have had successful head coaches in the past, taking a shot on somebody who spent over a decade coaching alongside Jay Wright. Totally understandable that they'd be willing to make that move for this program. Next coaching change, Bowling Green replaces Michael Hooger with Todd Simon. Hooger spent 8 seasons as the head coach at Bowling Green. He went almost exactly 500, 126 wins and 125 losses. But last year was the worst year of his career. He went 11-20. that's enough to get you canned. So he's out the door. He's now an associate head coach at Temple, landed on his feet, still got a nice job in the coaching industry. Meanwhile, Bowling Green replaces him with Todd Simon. Simon was the head coach at Southern Utah, not Southern Arizona, Southern Utah, the Thunderbirds, a 20-win team in 3 straight seasons. They went a remarkable 20-4 during the shortened 2020-21 season. Simon, a coach who has proven his worth at that WAC level at Southern Utah, now gets an opportunity to move here into the MAC and take over a Bowling Green program that has been struggling a little bit the last few years, but hopefully is going to start getting on the right track here with another coach at the helm. A couple other things I want to talk about here before we get into our award predictions, as well as our who we think is going to win the league, what is dark horse teams, all that good stuff. We talked about a lot of players out the door. And of course, that always is kind of the storyline with some of these lower major conferences. But every year there are players who transfer from the Power 5 level, Power 6 level. They transfer to these programs, to programs in the MAC or other conferences, and kind of pop off. Again, not every player is going to be Brandon Pajemski, who went from Illinois to Santa Clara, ended up getting picked in the top 20 of the NBA draft. That is a rare story, but it may continue to happen. And even if it doesn't result in draft picks, you're still going to see guys transfer to another level and have success, get more playing time, get more opportunities to shine. And there is a long list of guys who that could be the case for them in this 23-24 season. I'm going to list a few of them here. We'll talk about some of them in more depth as we start looking at our actual predictions for who's going to win the league, dark horse teams, and of course some award predictions as well. We talked about Ali already, went from Butler back to Akron after starting his career at Akron, had a lot of success with that team. So I think certainly a guy who could continue to have that success now that he's back. Trey Thomas goes from Vanderbilt to Bowling Green. Jason Spurgeon also goes to Bowling Green. He comes from Southern Utah, following, of course, his coach Todd Simon, 2 guys who were decently productive. Of course, Vanderbilt in the SEC, Southern Utah in the WAC, but still Spurgeon was a very productive player for them. You also have Tyam Freeman, who's going from Central Florida to Kent State. Sharif Mitchell going from Creighton to Ohio. Philmon Gibrip, who's going from DePaul to Northern Illinois. Also, Ethan Butler transferring from Oregon to Northern Illinois, and then closing it out with Javonte Brown transferring from Texas A&M to Western Michigan. There are a handful of other guys transferring in as well, but those are some of the players coming from some of those premier programs, from Power 5 level programs, with the exception of Spurgeon, who I think could make a legitimate impact on their teams this upcoming season in the MAC. Before we get into those award predictions and everything else, I want to talk tiers, as we've been doing here on Locked On College Basketball, trying to rank all of these programs in different tiers amongst their conference. There is 12 teams in the MAC, so we're going to rank them 4 different tiers, 3 teams per tier, starting with tier 1, Akron, Kent State, and Toledo. These are the 3 teams that have been pretty consistently the top of the league. KenPom doesn't quite agree. KenPom has Akron at 102, Kent State at 119, and Toledo at 155, all solid ranked teams. But in tier 2 is where I have Ohio, despite the fact that KenPom likes Ohio a lot better than I do. KenPom has them 114th, which would actually be second in the MAC, but I have them in tier 2 alongside Northern Illinois and Ball State. Northern Illinois comes in at 252. Ball State comes in at 228. Tier 3, Miami of Ohio at 233, Buffalo at 253, and then Bowling Green at 208. Once again, computers seem to like them a little bit more than I do based on their history, but certainly a team that could make the jump, especially with the new coach in Todd Simon. Closing it out with tier 4, which is the Michigan geography tier. We have Central Michigan at 312, Eastern Michigan at 314, and Western Michigan at 318. It's just unique that all 3 of those schools with the Michigan geography names are literally within 6 spots of each other in KenPom. 312, 314, and 318 will be a nice little battle for how those teams can fare this year, although I suspect all 3 of them will be towards the bottom of the standings in the MAC this upcoming season. Well, Akron was just 3 games out of first place last year, but with Ali coming back and Freeman in the mix, are they now the team to beat? We're going to talk about that after a word from today's sponsor, eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what helps keep your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts to choose from for your ride or die, you will find exactly what you are looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your car every single time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that victory. Keep your car alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, folks, closing out the show today, continuing our conversation about the MAC and who we think is going to be the favorites to win the conference, some dark horse teams who could sneak into that mix, and then we're going to close out the show with our award predictions as well. And we're going to start with Akron. Akron finished third in the MAC last year behind both Kent State and Toledo. We'll talk about them as well. But for Akron, yes, they lose a tremendous scorer in Xavier Castaneda. 21.7 points per game last year. That is a really hard player to replace. Not a lot of dudes averaging over 21 points per game in college basketball. Castaneda was one of the best scorers in the entire sport last year. He's out the door. They also lose Trendon Hankerson, who averaged about 9 points and 4 rebounds, but they keep Enrique Freeman. Enrique Freeman, 17 points per game, 11.2 rebounds last year, one of the best big men in the entire country, a dominant force down on the block for Akron. He's back in the mix. They also return Ali, as we said. He averaged 14 points per game at Akron in the 21-22 season. He transferred to Butler. He averaged 6.5 points per game in a reserve role for the Bulldogs and said, you know what, I want to go back. Left Butler, back to Akron, final year of eligibility. So Ali is back in the mix. Enrique Freeman's back in the mix. They also get Mikhail Dawson back. Now, Dawson missed the entire last season. But during the 21-22 season, when he was healthy, he averaged about 6 points, 3.5 rebounds, played about 24 minutes per night. So not a super prolific scorer, but kind of your glue guy, your do-it-all sort of player. So you get a healthy Dawson back in the mix, a guy who's been in the program for a handful of years. You get Ali back in the mix, who's also been in the program a handful of years. You get Enrique Freeman back, who's one of the best players in the conference, the only first teamer and the only first and second teamer to return to the MAC this upcoming season. So all of that alone puts this team in a really good spot to contend for a championship. And beyond that, they added a transfer in Northern Illinois transfer, Caleb Thornton. Thornton stays in the conference. He was a starting point guard for NIU last year, 30 minutes per game, 8.8 points, 5.3 assists, 1.7 rebounds per game. So you're getting an experienced point guard who's played in this league. You toss him into the mix along with the rest of the squad that you got. You add some bench depth. Wichita State shooting guard Shama Scott didn't play much for the Shockers, only 12 minutes per game, about 2.5 points. But he shot about 36% from deep, so you got a shooter coming off the bench. He should contribute. All of this leads to a situation where Akron looks like the Zips are the team to beat. Having said that, Kent State and Toledo, both fantastic programs. Kent State 15-3 last year. Toledo 16-2 in conference play. The Flashes lost 3 double-digit scores. That includes, of course, Sincere Carey, one of the best players in the conference last year. Meanwhile, Toledo lost 3 guys who averaged 16 or more points per game. Both those teams made additions. Both those teams have good coaches. Both those teams should be right back in the mix. But for me, if I'm looking at these 3 teams that were within 3 games of each other last year, and one team returned their best player, got a couple transfers back, got a guy healthy, versus the other 2 teams who lost their 3 leading scorers, I'm going to lean towards the team in Akron. And I think that they got the best chance of winning the league this year, potentially getting themselves a 12 or a 13 seed in the big dance and making somebody at the top a little bit nervous. What about dark horse teams? It's not necessarily going to be one of those top 3 teams, although it seems pretty likely. If it's going to be somebody else, give me Northern Illinois. Northern Illinois went 13-19 last year. They went 9-9 in the MAC, tied for 6th. However, they return 3 double-digit scores in David Coit, the only other all-MAC player who returned besides Enrique Freeman. Coit averaged 15.5 points per game last year. They also returned another guard, Keshawn Williams, who averaged about 18 points per game last year. And they returned Zariq Nutter, power forward, who averaged 12.5 points per game. So 3 double-digit scores back. They also get their starting center back, Harvin Ebargan, who averaged 5.5 points and 4.4 rebounds in about 21 minutes. And they add an intriguing transfer from DePaul in Philmon Gebrewit. Gebrewit was a fifth-year small forward. He comes over from DePaul. He averaged about 6 points per game. He shot 37.2% from deep. So you're getting a guy who contributed in the Big East. Yes, DePaul's not very good, but a guy who played legitimate minutes for that team, shot 37% from three. You also get a pair of young Power 5 transfers in Ethan Butler and Coran McPherson. Butler's a 6'6" redshirt sophomore from Oregon. He only played about 3.5 minutes per game for the Ducks. And then McPherson's a 6'4" redshirt sophomore from Nebraska who did not play last year. Neither of them can be counted on significantly. They're kind of up in the air right now, but most of the projections for how this lineup shakes out don't have either of them starting or playing big minutes for Northern Illinois. So if you get anything out of them, it's kind of gravy. But this is a team that they got some experience. They got some returnees. They got some intriguing newcomers. I don't think it's crazy to think they go from sixth to second or third, fourth at least behind those big three. But I think they could legitimately contend to be one of the better teams in this conference. And who knows? You make a deep run in the conference tournament, and suddenly you find yourself back in the big dance, which would be fun for Northern Illinois, a program that hasn't been there in a while but had some success not that long ago. Looking ahead to our awards before we close out the show here. Player of the Year, I'm going with Enrique Freeman, the only first-teamer to come back. It feels like kind of the obvious choice, but again, he averaged a double-double last year. 16.8 points, 11.2 rebounds. He was a just under 62% shooter from the field. Akron, I expect to be the best team. Freeman, I expect to be the best player on the best team. A guy who already has accolades from the conference in the past. To me, that feels pretty obvious. Honorable mention, again, not rocking the boat here too much. I'm going with David Coit, the other player who was an all-MAC player last year, was a third-teamer. He's returning if NIU makes a run, if they do finish second or third in the conference. He's their leading point guard, or he's their point guard, probably their leading scorer. I think there's a real chance that he could take it in that situation as well. Looking at newcomer or freshman of the year, I'm going with DJ Smith. Haven't talked about DJ Smith yet. He's a guy who transferred from Little Rock to Bowling Green. He averaged 10.3 points and 2.8 assists at Little Rock last year. All indications are that he's going to be the starting point guard for Bowling Green this year. I don't expect Bowling Green to be particularly great, but if they show some signs of life, if they look a little bit better under Coach Todd Simon than they have in the past, if DJ Smith puts up similar or even better numbers, 11 or 12 points, 4 or 5 assists, that might be enough for him to take home this award. I intentionally skipped Ali because he is a newcomer to the conference in the sense that he was at Butler last year, but I felt like that was a little bit of cheating, although he could be the person who takes home this award as well. I also like Gebrewit, the DePaul transfer, who is going to play for NIU this year as well. Coach of the Year, let's stick with Northern Illinois, Rashawn Burno, he went 6-12 his first year. He went 9-9 last year. Keep up the trajectory, goes 12-6 this year, finishes third or fourth. There you go. Like we said, 3 starters back. He adds the DePaul transfer, Gebrewit. I think this is a team on the rise. I think there's a reasonable chance that if they continue that climb, that he could end up being the coach of the year in this conference. And we'll close out the show today with our defensive player of the year, Caleb Thornton at Akron. Again, he was at Northern Illinois last year, their starting point guard, 1.7 steals per game. Now he goes to Akron. I think he's got a chance to put up similar production, but you get more attention for those awards if your team is better and if Akron wins the league like I expect them to do. And Thornton's their starting point guard, and he is top 3, top 5 in the conference in steals. I think that might be enough for him to potentially take this award. I think the front runner is probably Enrique Freeman, but I didn't want to double him up as player of the year and defensive player of the year, although I wouldn't be shocked if at the end of the year, the MAC does in fact give him both of those awards. That's going to wrap us up for today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Shout out to those everyday listeners checking out the show on YouTube as well. We'll be back later this week with more conference previews. We got more other fun stuff, looking at the AP poll, ranking some of the teams, who are we higher on, lower on, some other stuff, all coming your way later this week on Locked On College Basketball. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you have not done so yet. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, as always, peace out.